I'm Kirk Hanson, the Executive Director of the Markkula Center for Applied Ethics at Santa Clara University. This is one of a series of conversations with Hank Shea. For 20 years, a very successful white-collar federal prosecutor, and now affiliated with the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota and the University of Arizona Law School in Tucson. Hank, let's continue our discussion about the responsibilities of boards of directors.
Great.
And so willful blindness is a new concept that's getting a lot of attention. And it is, I can't prove that you knew about something, but you should have known. And that concept of should have known, should have asked more questions, and so on. Why is this such a big thing today? Why is this a new area of prosecution?
Willful blindness really has come into the fore in the last 10 years, I think in part because of the Enron scandal and the other corporate scandals that followed it. There has been an increasing desire on the part of prosecutors, but I think others in society, from elected officials to regulators, to hold more people to account in the cases where institutional wrongdoing occurs, to spread the locus of responsibility onto just more than the individual wrongdoer, but for those who are responsible for supervising that wrongdoer. So, for example, the whole concept of willful blindness is one that says in the criminal law, you do not convict somebody of a crime unless you can prove that they were knowingly and intentionally involved in wrongdoing. Yet in cases, for example, in Enron, you had the CEO, Jeff Skilling, charged with offenses that occurred by other people at other times when he was not present and may not even have been involved in that particular act. And yet the law has evolved to the point that a person like a CEO who is aware of general wrongdoing by others can be held responsible for those people's future violations if he or she had been in the position of being able to change or stop that behavior.
So this is because I know it's going on or is likely going on, and I'm in a position of power or a gatekeeper or something like that, I ought to have acted. But if I don't ask the questions in order to somehow have deniability, then I'm just as vulnerable to prosecution.
Yes, and the key phrase you used there was gatekeeper. And this is a phrase that every aspiring lawyer, every aspiring business executive should be very much aware of, because it is something that has real meaning. If you're in a position of responsibility, you have an obligation, not just to your own conduct, but for those who you supervise and who answer to you. And when you fail to exercise that responsibility, you own the conduct of those subordinates. Let me give you a concrete example. I prosecuted the general counsel of a local corporation in Minnesota who was the only lawyer in this 1,000-employee company. Employees brought to his attention the fact that they had obtained confidential business information from a competitor. He looked at the sheet, he saw it had been stamped proprietary confidential. He said, "How did you get that?" And they said, "Well, we got it off their website." He said, "That's wrong. Don't do it again. I don't want to see any more of this around here." The salespeople went back and said, "Our bonuses are based on obtaining this type of intelligence. We're going to keep doing it." The general counsel never followed up with them. So
he should have known that the culture rewarded this behavior and that they would likely find a way around his simple "don't do it."
At a minimum. He also should have asked, "How long have you been doing this?" He would have found they had a whole library of stolen information. He should have gone back 2 weeks later and said, "Have in fact you stopped doing this?" And he would have possibly should have learned that the conduct was continuing.
In the discussion we did this morning with a board of directors here in San Francisco, one of the board members pushed back on you on this question of willful blindness and said, how can you ever apply that standard to directors? They don't have day-to-day contact with people in the company. And how do they know what they should be following up on? Isn't this too high a standard for members of boards of directors?
And I want to be real clear that I don't think the courts are there yet at saying that board members are going to be held to the standard. The question is, do you view your board member as a gatekeeper? The general counsel, the compliance officer, the CFO are all clearly gatekeepers of organizations. Clearly, an argument can be made that the chair of the board, or even the chair of the audit committee, or individual board members in some cases,
A lead director, maybe.
A lead director have become so involved in the workings of the company, have become so involved in the responsibilities of how this organization does its work, that they should be held to the same type of standard as a compliance individual, or a lawyer, or a CPA. The question is whether the courts are evolving there, and there's a recent case out of Texas, which I talked about in an earlier video, where the chair of the board of a hospital, who had learned of wrongdoing by the executive director, told him to stop it, made things right, but the executive director went back and did it again. That chair ultimately was held responsible under a willful blindness theory for the failure to pay taxes by that hospital. That's the extension of the law that I'm talking about, and I think every board member needs to be aware of.
So a board has to be careful never to say, don't tell me more about that. Because that's a smoking gun, perhaps, in a prosecutor's examining a case.
I mean, the watchword that I use is avoid willful blindness or engage in it in your peril. And you act in a perilous way, given the desire of many individuals who have been wronged by organizations to say who ultimately was responsible for the people that conducted this wrongdoing.
And they're looking up and up and up, and they get to the board.
They will. They will certainly try to do so.
Thank you very much, Hank.
You're welcome.